Doctor Who is one of the longest running television shows of all time, so to some, it might be a challenge to narrow down what its best scenes are, which is exactly why I'm gonna cheat. Don't worry my friends, this video is not clickbait, but merely the first in a trilogy where I break down my picks for the best moments, aka the best scenes in Doctor Who's revival era. In these videos, I will talk about why these scenes are so effective, what makes them work so well, and why they could only exist in this TV show, which I think you can tell I care way too much about. So don't forget to subscribe, my friends. And let me let you into a secret here, people. The most amount of subscribers I have ever gained off a single video is 120. How's this, people? With the Christmas December spirit surrounding us, is it possible for us to beat that today? For heaven's sake. For today, we are breaking down one of the best episodes in this show's history. Now, I want to reiterate that this video will be mainly focused on the scene/sequence at the end of this episode and not this episode as a whole, meaning that there will be major spoilers up ahead. Major spoilers. If you have not watched Heaven Sent or are new to Doctor Who, believe me when I say this is one of the best and most beloved stories in the past couple decades of television. You do not want to ruin this for yourself. Do yourself the biggest favor and watch this story before continuing. Additionally, to provide context to the sequence in question, I will be giving a brief recap of the events leading us to the point, as well as a wider analysis of the episode. If you think that this is just an excuse for me to talk about this story in more detail, you would be absolutely right. Check out my top 10 episodes list for more on that. I'm kind of giving the game away, people. Speaking of which, my list of favorites is separate from my list of best. So if you have watched that video already, do not worry. There is still so much stuff to go over here, and just to cover my back, there is a difference between best scene in an episode and best episode, just so people don't get on my back. Finally, rounding up all the cautions and warnings, this video along with the ones to come are merely my opinion. If you have any alternative for what you believe is the best scene in Doctor Who history, feel more than free to leave it in the comment section down below. But with all that said, roll it. The Doctor finds himself in a prison, a castle, where he is being monitored and watched at every step. He enters through a teleport, enraged and emotional after the death of his companion, Clara Oswald.
But she was killed by a bird!
Thank you, Toymaker. But this is no time to be joking around. The Doctor is not alone in this castle. In fact, he has an ever-present stalker. It is this horrific entity known only as the Veil. We'll be talking about the Veil in a bit, so keep this in mind. It is this hulking creature. I find it fascinating as an antagonist because it is the Doctor's greatest nightmare. In a show that can frequently get bogged down in lore and complex explanations, as much as I love the Daleks, they fulfill a great role in the wider story of Doctor Who. The Veil is so much more poignant as the Doctor's greatest fear because it is a memory, a nightmare from the Doctor's past when he was a young little boy living in the barn on Gallifrey. There was an old woman there. She died. She was covered in veils and everything all white. But on Gallifrey, the world is a desert. The body attracted flies and the sight terrified him to the core. Now that nightmare is reanimated, heaving itself around this castle, a castle which moves and turns, locking the Doctor in a dead end. It's looking like the end of the line until it freezes. The Doctor admitted something. He admits that he's afraid to die. And so begins the plot of Heaven Sent. Every confession he makes buys him more time. He treks around the castle trying to find a way out or goal, following hints and tips left behind for him and uncovering secrets which he probably shouldn't. The point of this is all centered around the hybrid, which we will talk about later. First, let's talk about this room. The Doctor finds a painting of Clara, decaying and flaking like the creature outside. This episode is all about her. Even in his mind palace, taking the form of the TARDIS, his memory of Clara is still there guiding him. This story is about his grief for her, and he feels it so totally. I love this photo. It does a very good job of showing that. Look at him, literally entirely in shadow. Her photo on the wall where he is positioned facing to it, but looking away. That is masterful right there. There is a beautiful monologue. Well, technically this whole episode is all a monologue, but it talks about the day where somebody dies and how that isn't the worst day. The worst day is everyone after that. Everyone they keep being gone. And when you know what the episode is about, that line hits harder than it already did before. I should probably mention that there is also a river of skulls. The Doctor also notes that he has not time travelled, but judging by the stars, he has somehow ended up in the future. This will be important later. Everything leads him to room 12, a nod to the fact that he is the 12th Doctor, and also a subtle callback to the God Complex's room 11 with Matt Smith. It's fitting that both rooms seem to feature the Doctor's greatest fear. Also, ignore the fact that according to Time of the Doctor, Peter Capaldi is actually the 14th Doctor and Matt Smith is the 13th, because that is... Room 12 contains a wall of asbantium, 20 feet thick and 400 times harder than diamond. And it is all that stands between him and home. All is doing a bit of heavy lifting there. The Doctor is completely trapped in this room, leading us finally to the topic of today's video. The Shepherd's Boy, composed by Murray Gold, is one of the most beautiful pieces of music I have ever listened to. Of course, I am biased because I love Doctor Who, but it truly is a masterpiece. And the Doctor has but one choice: to punch his way out. And dear Lord, does it hurt. With the veil approaching him like that one snail that touches you once and you die, you guys know the one. The Doctor has one final breakdown. Strangely enough, I find this the most affecting moment in the whole episode. Clara turning around, finally showing her face and telling the Doctor what he needs to do, with this heartbreaking line delivery from Peter Capaldi.
You still want me there?
Now, feel free to say in the comments if you disagree, guys, but I'm getting the feeling that this guy might be the GOAT of all time. I'm just getting a hunch. The Doctor remembers the word he saw before, bird, and it all makes sense now. He is reminded of a story. I want to go back to the veil and why I am in love with this idea so much. Heaven Sent as an episode works exceedingly well as a standalone, but when you look around it and how it incorporates every aspect of its era up to this point, you gain a whole other level of understanding and appreciation for the story at hand. The prime example of this is the relationship between the Doctor and Clara. This episode gets proportionally better the more acquainted you are with the bond that these two share. It's why I don't really understand those who claim to love this episode but hate its follow-up, Hellbent. I'll explore that more in a second, but if you truly think the gap in quality between these two episodes is as astronomical as you claim, the truth might be that you don't understand this story as much as you think you do. How pretentious is that? But anyway, moving back to the veil, the whole idea of this is building off what we have already seen, what was already established in both Listen and Day of the Doctor. The idea of the Doctor as a child, the idea of him being fearful, the idea of him experiencing these old nightmares. We're reincorporating themes that have already been explored, and if you remember in Listen, and especially its ending, you would also remember how important Clara is to all of that, regardless of whether the Doctor remembers it or not. I choose to believe that he does remember, by the way. Additionally, the veil is made from clockwork. It's a clockwork creature, exactly like the ones from Deep Breath. But even more importantly than that, it is exactly like the clockwork gears that appear at the start of every episode, every intro, every title sequence. It's all connected. The castle itself is exactly like the TARDIS. The reason why it swivels around like this is because it is exactly like the TARDIS. That's what the TARDIS does. The central teleport in this sand room is even designed to look like the central console. And of course, the skull that the Doctor knocks off in the tower is meant to be a representation of him. These are his skulls, over and over again, filling up the lake as far as the eyes can see. And if you don't believe me, just listen to this. The skull itself was modelled on Peter Capaldi's face. For all intents and purposes, it is his actual skull. The Doctor is of course trapped and eventually killed by a touch from the veil. Not immediately, though. While he is dying, and is most certainly going to die for real, he has enough energy to pull himself back to the teleport and reactivate it, bringing in a copy of himself back into the castle. Needing the fuel to do it, he burns himself. The whole thing has been a loop. Not a time loop, because time is passing, but an actual loop where the Doctor sacrifices himself again and again to create a new version of himself, gradually progressing every time. The clues he found were left by him, all leading to the same place and the same fate. The Doctor recounts a poem of the shepherd's boy, and when you believe it, in typical Stephen Moffat fashion, the whole thing comes from a fairy tale. How many seconds are an eternity? Without recounting the whole thing from memory, as I can do, I will instead pose the question to you guys. Which character in this story represents the Doctor? Now, I know, it's a Brothers Grimm story, it existed prior to the show, I understand all of that, I dismiss that way of thinking, that's not how I interact with media people. I believe the shepherd's boy is meant to represent the Doctor. The bird is what reminds the Doctor of the story, and the way he says, personally, I think that's a hell of a bird, might lead one in the audience to believe that he is the bird chipping away at a diamond mountain. But look beyond the literal and to the allegorical, or perhaps intertwine them both. I think the Doctor is the shepherd's boy. He is a shepherd's boy. He does live in a barn. The Emperor, whom he must obey, are the Time Lords, represented in this story through the veil, the confession dial. They demand he answer who/what is the hybrid. And instead, the shepherd's boy says, there is a mountain of pure diamond. It takes an hour to climb it and an hour to go around it. And every 100 years, a little bird comes and sharpens its beak on the diamond mountain. And when the entire mountain is chiseled away, the first second of eternity will have passed. Guess I said it all anyway. He is recounting the story. While he is doing it, I think the Doctor is the shepherd's boy. That's just my opinion, people. Feel free to leave your own. And after 4.5 billion years, the Doctor breaks the wall. He escapes the confession dial, and he finally arrives back home. So why is this scene so good? Excellent visuals, superb directing, an amazing score, perfect writing, and one of the best performances in television history. Let's put that all aside. I think it's because of the emotion. Remember that moment that I called attention to before? I actually think this is the most important part of the episode. Without this, it ceases to work. Well, not entirely, because it is still awesome, but the main reason I chose this moment to make a video on, outside of the fact that I desperately wanted any excuse to talk about this episode in more detail, is because of how it made me feel. Heaven Sent is a character study of the Doctor. We get to learn more about him here than we have ever before or since. Should we find out that the Doctor is a Time Lord, or he's a timeless child, or he's this or that, but actually who he is as a person, what he's thinking, what he's feeling, who is the man. Never before have we seen the Doctor be put in a position where he is forced to be so honest with himself. But not only is it a study on the Doctor, it is a study on grief. Okay, this is the only part of my analysis where I feel that what I'm saying has been said before, so feel free to provide your own insight on this in the comments below. This is definitely the most spoken about part of Heaven Sent from a thematic point of view. The days repeating with minimal changes, the emptiness and loneliness in his heart, and the wall you need to smash through to do absolutely anything in your life. We all feel that. I feel that. And I think that's why this episode is so effective to me. But what is the hybrid? The series arc to series 9, and a rather opaque concept that I'm going to be giving my 2 cents on right now. Literal answer, it's the Doctor and Clara. Together they become so reckless that they could accidentally destroy the universe or something. In Hellbent, when Clara is rescued, they actually do almost destroy the universe, so that is the answer. I find that a little disappointing though, so I'm going to answer instead with the meta lens in a way that I think was intended. The hybrid represents the bond between the Doctor and the companion. It's the very structure of the show. As I said, very meta, I know. But this is quite literally the most meta era in Doctor Who history, so more on that at a later date. But moving back to the hybrid, I've talked about this in the past in various other videos, but each of the Doctor and the companion fulfill different functions in the story, and the two are not interchangeable. That said, they also do not have a strict hierarchy of one on top of the other. I know it might seem that way, but if you actually look at the show, the importance of one of these roles is not inherently above the other. You do need both. For Doctor Who to exist, you need the Doctor and his companion. But in the context of Series 9 specifically, yes, it does mean the Doctor and Clara. This is why Series 9 is constituted of two-parters, two as in a hybrid. Why the Zygon episodes deals with clashing identities, they're like a hybrid. And why the start is on Skaro and the end is on Gallifrey, it's all about the theming, people. It's all about the theming. The idea of me and a shielder even ties into this, with immortality being a big part of the ending conflict in Hellbent and the season as a whole, with the story arc. Look at this man's giant brain. How about this for a reading, folks? The Doctor is meant to represent Stephen Moffat, and smashing the wall is meant to represent what it is like making Doctor Who. I don't have a good segue into this topic, but I wanted to talk about the Doctor's age and whether or not he remembers what happens in Heaven Sent. With no evidence to this theory but vibes and narrative satisfaction, I like to imagine he remembers all of Heaven Sent, all 4.5 billion years of it. Of course, the last run would be more fresh in his mind, but I believe when he exits the confession dial, he remembers all of it. But kind of like a dream memory, akin to what Donna describes at the end of Turn Left. This explains his disposition in Hellbent and this small interaction at the end of Wild Blue Yonder.
I'm not.
I must admit, I really love this moment, and pure headcanon at this point, but when I watch that episode and when I watch it now, I always read this scene as referring to Heaven Sent. I always think that's what he's thinking of when he says that. All that said, I have a little thing I want to point out here. A lot of people say that the Doctor dies in Heaven Sent and that the one we follow from that point on is a clone of a clone of a clone, etc. This is not true. One Doctor went into the confession dial and one Doctor comes out. The first Doctor that arrived in the prison was the first clone, so the real Doctor technically never arrived because this isn't a real place. It's a separate dimension, just ignore all that star stuff. So the real Doctor is saved, as it were, and remains the same as when he went in. All of the stuff that happens in between still happens, but the Doctor in Hellbent is the same Doctor that went in Face the Raven. He's just been through some shit. Hopefully that clears that up. I hope you all enjoyed this video and my deep dive into Heaven Sent. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and maybe if you want, feel free to share this video with a friend. Share it on social media, hear what everyone has to think. You guys know what I'm talking about. And with all that said, thank you all for obliging me. I will see you in the next one. Love you, bye.